The biggest mistake that people make with their savings is they set it and forget it. They decide what percentage of their income they want to save, and then they never revisit that number. But saving 10% of your $25,000 salary is very different than saving 10% of your $100,000 salary. And if you get a raise or you change jobs, maybe your expenses change. Maybe you have kids. Maybe you don't. All these things should be considered when deciding how much you should be saving. So, in this video, I am gonna walk you through step by step how I decide what my savings rate should be each year, and hopefully this will help you figure out what your savings rate should be. Okay, let's dive in. First thing you want to do is write down your annual expenses. For me, I do this in a spreadsheet. I have one tab called Annual Expenses, and what I do is every time I pay for something, I write it down. So here you can see I wrote down all my expenses from 2020. These are all the things I paid for throughout the year, and I just wrote them down right here. And this is pretty easy because I use a credit card for most of my purchases, so I can just go through my credit card statements and write them all down. If you don't have a credit card, you can always just go through your bank account and all the checks you write or anything like that. You could also use some sort of tracker, but I find it best to just write them all down yourself because then you remember exactly what you paid for. Now here's the cool thing about having everything written down. Once you've written down everything you paid for during the year, add up all those expenses and divide it by 365, and that's going to tell you how much you spend per day. So here you can see I spent $79 per day on average in 2020. Now this is really powerful because now you can ask yourself, how much am I willing to live on per day? Because whatever this number is, that's how much you can afford to save. For example, if you're okay spending $50 per day, then you can take that number, multiply it by 365, and that's how much you can afford to spend each year, and you can take whatever you earn, subtract that amount, and that's how much you can afford to save. So, if I said I'm only comfortable living on $50 a day, well then I would take 50 times 365. That's $18,250. And here's the thing. You can use this method to figure out how much you should be saving no matter what your income is. So, let's say you make $50,000 a year and you want to figure out how much you should be saving. Well, first figure out how much you spend per day. That's going to be 50,000 divided by 365. That's $136.99. Then you can ask yourself, how comfortable am I living on $136 a day? Maybe you're super frugal and you're totally fine with that, in which case you can save all the money. Or, B, you want to save half of that, which would be 136.99 asterisk 0.5 equals $68 a day. Multiply that by 365 and you can see you can save $25,000 a year. Or, maybe you want to save even more than $136 a day because you feel like you don't spend enough on yourself. In which case, maybe you save 75% of that amount, which would be $100,250. Point is, you can use this method to figure out how much you should be saving no matter what your income is. But there's one more step, and that is to decide what portion of your income you're going to save. So once you know how much you want to spend per day, you know how much you can afford to save each year. The next thing you need to do is decide what portion of your income that's going to be. So let's say you make $50,000 a year and you figured out you can afford to spend $136 a day or $49,500 a year. That means you could save 50% of your income. But let's say you make $100,000 a year. You can still afford to spend $49,500 a year. So that means you'd be saving 50% of your income again. But here's where it gets tricky. Say you make $100,000 a year and you can afford to spend $49,500 a year. Well, that means you could save 50% of your income. Right. Wrong. You may think that saving 50% of your income means you're doing a great job, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. Let's say you make $100,000 a year and you save 50% of that. That means you're putting away $50,000 a year, which is great. This means the second part of the equation is figuring out what percentage of your income you want to save. If you're young and you're just starting out, I recommend saving as much as you can. For me, I knew that I wanted to buy a house, and I knew that buying a house was going to cost a lot of money. I needed a 20% down payment. I needed closing costs. I needed all sorts of stuff. And so I knew that I needed to save as much as possible. So, for me, I decided I was going to save 70% of my income, and it was tough. It was really tough because I was making $50,000 a year. I was saving $35,000 a year. That meant I was spending $15,000 a year. And I had a roommate at the time, and I remember thinking that was just not enough. There's no way I can live on that amount of money. But I did it. I lived on $15,000 a year. I didn't buy any new clothes. I didn't go out to eat. I barely did anything, but I saved as much as I could so I could buy a house. So, if you're young and you have big goals, I recommend saving as much as you can. But, as you get older, you may not want to save as much. You may have kids. You may have other expenses. You may want to spend more money on experiences. You may want to spend more money on yourself. You may not want to be as frugal. So the percentage you want to save is really going to depend on you and your individual situation. So here's the summary. Step 1. Figure out how much you spend per day by adding up all your expenses and dividing it by 365. Then figure out how much you are comfortable spending per day. Multiply that by 365, and that's how much you can afford to save. Then decide what percentage of your income you want to save, and I recommend saving as much as you can if you're young and if you have big goals like buying a house or paying off debt. But, as you get older, you may not want to save as much. I hope this helps you figure out how much you should be saving. If you enjoyed this video, check out this video on how to create a budget that actually works, and I'll see you in the next video.